The morning sun poured across the skyline, turning the bay into a sheet of molten gold. Mara had woken up earlier than usual, partly because of the time difference and partly because her brain wouldn't stop running through tomorrow's presentation. She padded barefoot across the suite's marble floor, sliding open the balcony doors. The air was warm, perfumed with the tired scent of tropical gardens below. She looked out at the hotel's infinity pool, a serene, glittering blue ribbon that rested so high it seemed to merge with the horizon. She hesitated for only a second before making up her mind. 10 minutes later, she was wrapped in a hotel towel, hair tied back loosely, swimsuit under her cover-up. Not a sporting thing, just a simple navy blue one-piece shed had 4 years, but it fit her comfortably. And that was all that mattered. The pool area was, thankfully, peaceful, with only a couple of guests in the far corner. Mara dropped her towel onto a chair, took a deep breath, and slid into the water. It was perfect, cool enough to be refreshing, warm enough to make her shoulders relax. She swam a few lazy laps, letting her thoughts drift, her hair unraveling from its tie until it floated around her like dark silk. She didn't notice him at first. Theodore was returning from an early morning run, earbuds still in, a towel slung around his neck. He was about to head for the elevators when movement by the pool caught his eye. At first, it was just someone in the pool. Then she turned toward the sun, and the sight hit him, that turbulence mid-flight. Mara, without her glasses, without her work clothes, without the sharp, business-like air she carried at the office. She emerged from the water slowly, pushing her wet hair back, a relaxed curve of a smile on her face that he had never seen before. She walked up the steps, droplets tracing a path down her back. For one disarming second, Theodore forgot to breathe. She spotted him, her smile faltering for a moment, then it widened. Well, Hastings out in the world. I didn't think you ever left your suit. He took a step closer, pulling the earbuds from his ears. I could say the same about you. I barely recognize you without the attitude. He gestured vaguely, as if to mean all of this, the relaxed smile, the messy hair, the bare arms. Careful, she said, wrapping her towel around herself. That sounded dangerously like a compliment. Maybe it was. His voice was quieter now. Mara tilted her head, studying him. You okay, Hastings? You look like you just saw profits quadruple. Something like that, he said. But his eyes didn't leave her. There was a beat of silence, not an awkward one, just a charged one. The kind of pause that had never existed between them before. She broke it with a flat grin. Come on then. Are you going to join me? Or are you too scared of wrinkling that perfect reputation? I didn't bring swimwear, he confessed. Pity, she said, grabbing her towel tighter and brushing past him toward the elevators. I guess you'll just have to imagine what it's like to have fun. As she walked away, he caught himself watching her for longer than he should have. And in that instant, Theodore Hastings knew something had shifted. The meeting with the Lee Group was a triumph. Theodore was razor sharp in the boardroom, all confidence and control, while Mara handled every technical glitch, every missing document, and every subtle cultural courtesy with ease that proved she'd done her homework. When the last handshake was made, Theodore simply said, "Good work," but his gaze at her lingered just long enough for her to wonder if he meant more than just the presentation. That evening, Mara convinced him to skip the stuffy hotel restaurants and head to a lively night market she had read about in a guidebook. Trust me, she promised, as they wove through the crowd. The air was thick with the scent of grilled skewers, sizzling noodles, and something smoky she couldn't recognize. Theodore surveyed the chaos with mild suspicion. This doesn't seem sanitary. Relax, Hastings. You're not going to die. She stopped at a stall where an old vendor was fanning skewers over hot coals. 2 of these, please. The vendor handed her 2 sticks of meat dripping with sauce. She bit into one and sighed happily. Oh, that is good. Here. She held the other one out to him. He hesitated. What is it? She grinned. Don't ask. Just try it. To her surprise, he did. And after a moment of chewing, that's actually incredible. See, you're welcome. They wandered 4 hours, tasting dumplings, shaved ice, and something neon green that Theodore flatly refused to eat. She bought a beaded bracelet from a street vendor. When she tried to pay, Theodore had already slipped cash into the man's hand. "That was unnecessary?" she asked. "No," he said, simply. On the third day, they finished a morning briefing earlier than expected. Mara couldn't resist checking out the gardens by the bay. Towering steel trees, covered in vines, with walkways curving between them, like something out of a sci-fi movie. They wandered along the elevated paths until Mara realized Theodore was no longer next to her. Hastings. A moment later, she spotted him a good 20 yards away, standing at a dead end, looking very much like a man who was not good at being lost. She strolled up, laughing. Did the big, scary CEO just get confused by a map? "I'm taking the scenic route," he said, with perfect composure. "Sure you are." After a late-night work dinner, Mara found herself on the balcony of her suite, the city lights glittering below. She was surprised when Theodore knocked once and stepped out, 2 glasses of wine in his hand. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He handed her a glass. "Couldn't work anymore." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then, to her surprise, they started talking, not about quarterly projections or flight schedules, but about the books that had stuck with them 4 years. The places they wanted to see before they were old, the stupid little mistakes that had haunted them for far longer than they should have. He told her about the pressure of following in his father's footsteps, the deals that had almost gone wrong before had even started. Mara listened, leaning on the railing, the breeze tugging at her hair. She told him about growing up in a cramped apartment above her mother's bookstore, how she had learned to work hard because there was no other choice. It wasn't flirty, not exactly, but there was a weight to the conversation. The kind of truth you don't share unless you trust someone. At one point, he looked at her for a moment too long and almost said, "You were nothing I expected when I hired you." She smiled, thinly. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." By the time the 4th day came, the lines between a work trip and something else entirely had blurred. They still attended meetings, still kept their schedules, still played the part of CEO and assistant in public. But in private, there were looks that lingered, jokes that felt like secrets, and a growing sense that neither of them was ready for this trip to end. It was raining, soft and warm, as they left the hotel, the kind that stuck to the skin like a whisper. The bellhop loaded their luggage into the waiting car, while Mara stood under the awning, watching the city sparkle in the morning light. She felt the same odd ache she used to feel after a good book, the kind you didn't want to end. Theodore emerged from the hotel lobby behind her, perfectly composed, as if the last 4 days had been nothing but a standard business trip. But she noticed the small things, the way his gaze lingered on her as she got in the car, the almost smile that couldn't quite settle on his face. The car ride to the airport was silent, but not the usual Theodore Hastings kind of quiet. This was softer, easier. He was on his phone, too, but he wasn't barking orders or asking her to open her laptop. Once she caught him staring out the window, as if he were 1,000 miles away from work entirely. On the plane, the first-class cabin was hushed and dim, the kind of air intended for sleep. Mara settled into her seat by the window, wrapping the blanket around her legs. Theodore handed her a small white box before stowing his briefcase. She looked at it. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a small velvet box, not jewelry, but a set of pearl and silver cufflinks shaped like tiny books. Her breath caught. "From the night market. I like them," he said, simply, sitting down. "They're for me, but they reminded me of you." Mara blinked at him. "You bought me cufflinks. You're always complaining about how boring business attire is. Consider it an upgrade." She smiled. "This is dangerously close to thoughtful." "Don't spread that around," he said, but there was a look in his eyes. Not quite a joke, not quite serious. Midway through the flight, Mara dozed off, her head resting lightly against the plane wall. Somewhere over the ocean, she shifted, her head falling against his shoulder. Theodore froze for a moment, unsure whether to move her. Then he didn't. Instead, he sat there, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing and the warmth of her arm brushing his. He kept his eyes fixed on the dark cabin, but in his chest, Something felt unstable. She woke up with a jolt, blinked, realized where she was, and sat up quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said. "I didn't mind." His eyes searched hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then he leaned back into his seat. Neither of them spoke, but the silence felt different now. Not formal, not awkward. It was full. As the plane began its descent, Mara stared out the window at the city lights twinkling far below. "It feels surreal," she murmured. Theodore's voice was low but clear. "It won't be quite the same." She turned to him. "What won't?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he offered the faintest smile, the kind he never wore at the office, and said, "You'll see." By the time the wheels touched down, Mara knew one thing for certain. Whatever she had left in Singapore wasn't coming back with the luggage. Hastings & Co.'s open-area office plan was always alive with the low hum of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and hushed planning sessions over half-drunk coffee. But on Monday morning, the buzz had a different edge. Mara felt it the moment she walked in. Conversations paused for a split second as she passed. Someone looked up quickly from a spreadsheet. Two interns at the copier gave her a brutish half-smile people give you when you're dying to ask a question, but don't dare. "Oh no," she thought. The rumor mill has clocked in early today. The moment she reached her desk, a message pinged on her computer. It was from Marcy in HR. "They saw you to come in from the airport together. First class, I heard." Mara rolled her eyes and closed the chat window. She wasn't feeding the fire. Theodore emerged from his office at exactly 9 a.m. As precise as a Swiss watch. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Mara's monthly rent and moved through the room with his usual calm authority. But when he stopped at her desk, something unusual happened. He set down a cardboard cup. "Double shot latte," he said. "Extra cinnamon." Mara blinked at the cup, then at him. "You remember my coffee order." "I have an excellent memory for the most important details." From nearby desks, heads subtly turned. Mara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You know this is going to spark at least 3 conspiracy theories before lunch." "Right, let them speculate," Theodore said, straight-faced before walking back into his office. Mara stared after him, mouthing under her breath, "I'm going to kill him." By mid-morning, the whispers had grown legs. Mara caught snippets of them in the break room. They sat next to each other the whole flight. Apparently, he's staying in a suite now. She escaped by returning to her desk and burying herself in the Postly group reports. The work was enough of a distraction until Theodore appeared in her office doorway. "We're reviewing the new harbor project plans in the boardroom. You're coming." She looked at the stack of papers on her desk. "And if I say I'm swamped, you'll still come." She grabbed her notebook, mouthing, "One of these days, Hastings." In the boardroom, she sat to his right, taking notes, as he calmly presented the polished project proposals. At one point, she caught Theodore watching her instead of the slides. "What?" she whispered, without looking up from her notes. "Nothing," he said, but the faint smirk at his mouth said otherwise. She shook her head, biting back a smile. This is dangerous territory, she thought. That afternoon, she returned from a quick lunch break to find a small paper bag on her desk. Inside was a chocolate croissant from the bakery across the street, the one that sold out by 9:30 a.m. There was no note, but she didn't need one. When she passed Theodore's office a few minutes later, he didn't look up from his laptop, but the corner of his mouth curved slightly. At the end of the day, Mara knew two things for certain. The office rumors were not going to die down anytime soon, and she didn't care as much as she should have. It started with an email. Subject line, dinner, 7:30 tonight. No pleasantries, number reason, no corporate jargon, just an address to a restaurant. Mara had to Google it. It turned out to be the kind of place that didn't list prices on its menu and had a 6-week waiting list for normal people. She debated ignoring it. She had already planned on staying in her sweatpants with a bowl of pasta, but curiosity won. Or maybe it wasn't curiosity. Maybe it was that half-smile had given her yesterday when he dropped off her coffee. When she arrived, the restaurant was a low-lit, amber-hued space, and the muted hum of conversation was spoken in a genre of voices that didn't have to shout to be heard. She paused just inside the door, scanning the tables until she spotted him. Theodore was already seated, his jacket perfectly tailored, his tie loosened just enough to look intentional. He stood when he saw her, his eyes warming in a way that made her suddenly conscious of every choice she had made about her dress, hair, and even her lipstick. "You clean up well, Barnes," he said as she sat down. She arched a brow. "Careful, Hastings. That's to compliments in as many weeks. People are already talking." A waiter appeared, carrying a bottle of wine Theodore had clearly already chosen. He ordered without much fuss. She went for the seared scallops, he for the fillet. When the wine was poured, she raised her glass. "To the deal," she teased. He clinked his glass lightly against hers. "Not tonight." They talked, really talked, not about quarterly projections or flight schedules, but about the books that had stuck with them 4 years, the places they wanted to see before they were old, the silly little mistakes that had haunted them far longer than they should have. She told him about the time she had accidentally called her high school English teacher Mom in front of the whole class. He laughed, actually laughed, leaning back enough that she could notice how rare it was to see him unguarded. He told her about a time, early in his career, he'd tried to impress a client by cooking them dinner, and the effort ended up setting off the building's fire alarm. Mara almost spit out her wine somewhere between the main course and dessert. She caught herself leaning in, elbows on the table, smiling in a way she didn't care to hide. Theodore's eyes dropped briefly to her hands, then back to her face. "You know," he said, his voice lower now, "I think we've been negotiating the wrong deal all along." "OH," she said, tilting her head. "And what's the right one?" He sat up slightly, bridging the small distance between them as if weighing his words. Then his hand reached for hers, a deliberate light touch, but enough to send a jolt up her arm. "A partnership. A long-term one. No contract unless it's the personal kind." Her lips curved. "Sounds risky. High risk, high reward." He leaned back slightly, enjoying the rare sight of her letting her guard down. "Well, I'm open to negotiations. I'm counting on it." They lingered at the table, long after the plates had been cleared, the conversation dipping into quieter territory. By the time they left, the air outside was cool, and Theodore walked her to her waiting car without questioning where she was headed, as if he already knew. And maybe he did, because when she glanced back at him from the car window, his expression wasn't the CEO face she knew so well. It was something else entirely,